Okay.
Woo!
I'm just going to double check on YouTube to see if we have, in fact, gone live. Okay, we're live.
Nice.
All right, so this is amazing. Welcome to Women Making Films event, first event of 2021. We have with us the amazing Nina Paley. Nina Paley is an American cartoonist, animator, radical feminist, and free culture activist. She's best known for creating the 2008 animated feature Sita Sings the Blues, based on Ramayana, with parallels to her personal life. In 2018, she completed her second animated feature, Cedar Massachusetts, a retelling of the Book of Exodus as patriarchy emerging from goddess worship. Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for taking the time out and talking to the members of Women Making Films.
Thank you so much. And we're slightly early, so we'll just chat away while we wait.
Yeah.
Will we know when people actually show up? Will you get a little?
We will know on top over here on the top left screen to see if there are people, like this little eye symbol on the top left. I don't know if you can see it. I can see it.
No.
Yeah. There's a good chance that Friday morning people are probably working, and there's a good chance that people will watch it later after it's on YouTube.
Yeah, but it hasn't even technically begun yet. It's still 8:59. So we're early. The last thing anyone would expect is that we would be early.
No, but it's always great for us to chat. That's always been fun. So
Yeah.
I'm not regretting going early, or you and I catching up like quick 5-10 minutes before. It's always fun.
How are we were just talking about various cancellations. What's your latest cancellation? What canceled you most recently?
Well, I think my latest cancellation is this dreadful silence from Indian media about the film that I have just completed, which otherwise you'll see like an odd article in some newspaper somewhere about this film that I have finished or something like that, or mostly because it's a topic that is of relevance, and it's a topic that usually people are also concerned as much as I am. So there will be this odd review or a plug for the film where they can watch it and things like that. But right now it's like deafening silence. This is after I have emailed a bunch of them. No reply whatsoever. So that says something.
It does.
I guess you just keep doing what you're doing and keep moving forward. What else can you do?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about myself, even with with all the cancellations. I'm like, I'm still here. I'm plugging away, and they're not getting me down.
No, not at all. That's not possible.
Did. Yeah, but it's like I just put one foot in front of the other and keep doing my work and keep telling the truth, and so be
amazing.
it.
Yeah. What else can you do? I mean, I'm just wondering, like, okay, what can you do? You can't stop making films. You can't be afraid and just go hide away somewhere. You've gotta carry on living your life and doing what you do. It's only natural. So I get this thought in my head often that eventually the tide will turn. Probably not in our lifetime, but eventually it will. And maybe the films that we make, the kind of people that we are, the films that we make will get mainstream attention at some point in the future. So yeah, on that super weird cancellation note, I think we should get started. I'm very excited to talk to you today about portraying female in animation. This is a very, controversial topic, and a lot has been said about it, a lot has been written about it. But the portrayal in itself is a very tricky thing, because we live in a society where female is portrayed as an object, be it in the movies, be it in media, advertisements, anywhere, children's books, everywhere. So I was wondering if we could get started with just your thoughts, your early initial thoughts about what you think female is, and how do you go about, portraying her in your artwork?
Yeah. Female. Well, female is a biological category. It's a material reality, as we know. Historically, we've always known what female is and what women are. And portraying women and girls in animation or in art, or really just having your own female body in this world, it's all colored by the objectification of women, right? Like we're not just in our bodies looking out, we also are familiar with the way that we're being looked at. And, you know, having a female body is highly charged in our societies with like, how do we look and are we objects? So the real issue is, do you make sexy women sexy, right? Like in male dominated media, like cartoons and animation, the depictions of women before women started creating these things was usually incredibly objectified. The best example of that is Smurfette. Maybe we could pull up a picture of Smurfette. And actually, I'm getting a little weirded out just seeing my own image here. If you can change the screen so that I can see you at the same time. Oh, thank goodness. Right, so you have all these Smurfs, and they have all these different characters. And then there is one Smurf in the whole village of Smurfs, which is Smurfette, which is the girl Smurf, right? Which actually reminds me of gender, right? Like in the Smurf world, gender actually is a personality trait, right? Like you can be strong, you can be weak, you can be mean, you can be kind, you can be a girl, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Smurfette, you know, had the long hair and the batty eyelashes and things like that. We have these tropes in Minnie Mouse. You know, Minnie Mouse is Mickey Mouse, but with long eyelashes and a skirt
and a bow.
And a bow.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what female is. And then in these old Tex Avery cartoons, which I love them, but you have this character called Red, like in Red Hot Riding Hood. And she is the most sexy character ever. I guess Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit was based on her. So when you're a woman and you're representing women in cartoons and animation, clearly you want, you're doing it from your view, and yet there is such a thing as sexiness of women, right? Like, I mean, the safe way to portray women, if you're a woman, is just to make everybody sort of chaste and, you know, as sexless as possible, because you're trying to push back against the over objectification of women and the over sexualization of women. But women can also be genuinely sexy, right? Like this was my experience as a young woman. It's certainly not the case now, but as a young woman, yeah, like, you know, there were times I was myself hot, which was also confusing because just being sexual myself got all wound up in the male idea of the sexualization of women. And this is like an ongoing difficulty for women and sex, right? Like if we want to go exploring sex, we're just immediately thrust into this media world of men's idea about women's sexuality. And it's really hard to find your own sexuality as a woman. I mean, I'm not sure I ever even did find mine because it was so bound up with social ideas that come from men. It's bound up with sexism. But that doesn't change the fact that I had a sexuality. I'm spayed now, so I have very little sexuality. But I sure did back in the day. So the character of Sita in Sita Sings the Blues, I depicted her many different ways, but
I'm
the
gonna
way
just pull her out. Yeah.
so the way I depicted her was somewhat contentious because I showed her as being really sexy. I really emphasized her breasts and her hips. Reason I did that is because the text does that, or at least the Valmiki text. And also her so-called beauty or her attractiveness to men, or the fact that her body is coveted by men, that actually drives her narrative in the story. So emphasizing that was appropriate, I thought.
And how do we draw the line between, making her look sexy because we're trying to point out that she's objectified versus making her look sexy because it is somehow titillating for men? How do we, yeah.
Right. That's the ongoing problem. And it's the problem with men. Right. Like, to speak honestly as a woman, there's always this problem of, well, am I titillating the men? And it turns out men can be titillated by anything, right? Like they're titillated by little girls, right? It's sort of like, what do you say to a little girl? Like, oh, are you going to exist because you're titillating men? I'm getting an echo, by the way, but I don't know if the echo's coming through.
Okay, no, you're sounding fine.
Okay, cool. Right. So, I mean, I do think about this, and it is bothersome to think that, there are men getting off on these depictions, but ultimately I can't do anything about that. And I still want to communicate honestly. I mean, I certainly make my work. It's not designed. It's not designed to be pornography. It's not designed to get people off. Just as, my body and my life is not designed to get people off, right? Like, although there was a phase in my life where I did present myself in order to do that, which I will get back to in a moment.
Yeah.
But I hate that, my choice is to like censor myself out of the fear that some men are going to get off. Right. I mean, this reminds me of like, well, it's like walking around without a head covering because some men are going to get off. Right. It's like walking around covering yourself up. Some men are going to get off. I think that women know what these depictions mean. I mean, I think a lot of men know what they mean too. Right. Like there's a point to it, but it's just very complicated. And I also don't fault any woman that doesn't want to depict sexiness of female characters, right? I mean, like at this point in my life, well, actually, I don't know. I don't know if I would. Yeah, I still would. Yeah, I would still depict sexy women if it was part of a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, how else would you portray a sexy woman by not making her look sexy? I wonder. I think this is, like you said, an ongoing question, and there never really can be a black and white answer for it, because what don't men get titillated by? There is absolutely nothing. And if we are going to start policing our clothes, our young girls, there is absolutely no end to how much we can police, just because we're afraid that something that we depict or something that we are might make men get off. And I think there needs to be a sort of a clear divide between things that we do as women are, as the different kinds of women that we are. Some are sexy, some like to dress modestly, some wear hijab, some have short hair, some have long hair, all different kinds of women. I think we should have the freedom to portray them as they are without really having to worry about whether or not a man will get off, because we absolutely cannot control it. Now, coming back to Sita, while you portrayed Sita, many different Sitas, in fact, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the more conventional looking ones, the ones that is portrayed exactly like the mythology has portrayed it. Indian mythology has portrayed it. Previously, you alluded to how Valmiki has described Sita as a curvaceous, as a voluptuous woman, very desirable and everything. Could you please talk a little bit about that, and talk about how you decided that you wanted to have different kinds of Sitas? What role does each kind of Sita play with regards to the man, the Ram, either Ram or Ravan or anybody?
Well, the multiple Sitas, a lot of it had to do with just trying to trying to convey how many different Ramayanas there are and how many different takes on the Ramayana there are and how many different societies have their own Ramayana interpretations and how many eras historically have interpreted Ramayana differently and recorded it in their art. So what I offered in Sita Sings the Blues was actually just a small sample of the variety that was out there. And yeah, some of them are sexier than others. In this frame here, there's two versions. One is the shadow puppet, who is not, the shadow puppet's not playing Sita. The shadow puppet is a representative of Bhavana Nagalapalli, who's one of the three narrators.
Yes.
And then there's the postcard Sita, which is made of cut up postcards. And she's a little bit more chaste, although, you know, she's got the bare arms and no head covering. So I don't know. She's still, you know, she's still got some shape there. And actually, so does the shadow puppet, right? Like, it really depends on who you are. But these are, like, the shadow puppet is extremely stylized. I read somewhere that Southeast Asian shadow puppets, I guess Balinese or Javanese shadow puppets, which were made by Muslim groups that still had the Ramayana, which is interesting and good to remember that it's not an exclusively Hindu story. That they made super stylized shadow puppets as a way to, how can I say it? As a way to distance the art from reality, like as a way to not get too attached to it, I guess, as idols, right? So they're deliberately extreme and perhaps even a little bit grotesque. And I guess part of not making idols, really, which is part of Islam and it's part of Abrahamic religions, I guess one way you could interpret that is, you know, thou shalt not make pornography, right? Like, don't make a representation that's going to be so representative that you would actually be titillated by it. I don't think anybody is going to be titillated by the shadow, you know, the traditional Javanese shadow puppet Sita. Although really probably someone is, like, right? Someone out there there's probably shadow puppet porn, but not much, right? It's a lot harder because that's pretty grotesque. Yeah, and then the other representation it's literally cut from popular representations of gods and goddesses in popular, acceptable, mainstream Indian art. Sure.
I think while we're still talking about Sita Sings the Blues, I want to read out a question sent by one of the members who had signed up to watch this. You obviously had some form of backlash for portraying Sita this way from the Hindutva extremist groups after the film got released, and you obviously were told that somehow you're not allowed to talk about Ramayana, or you're not allowed to portray Sita because it somehow belongs to them and you can't take it and talk about it, and especially portray her in this sort of sexualized way. Between that and, you know, using the music that you used, which you know was largely blues from a very, very old artist, isn't that right? From a very long time ago. Yeah. Between
Annette
that,
Hanshaw from mostly from 1927 approximately.
Yeah. So you had this kind of censorship preventing you from screening it in different places, and you used music which is conventionally a very heavily copyrighted thing. Between that and between this, how did you go about going ahead and putting it out anyway? Like, how did you resist all these challenges, if you will?
Right. Well, there's so many ways that people try to censor, that people try to control expression. And it was interesting and enlightening to me as I was releasing Sita, the similarities between the religious fundamentalists and the copyright maximalists. In fact, copyright is a kind of religion, the same way genderism is a kind of religion, and the same way religion is a kind of religion, or any sort of fundamentalist religion. And all of these, what they boil down to are people are trying to control culture. They're trying to control expression and the dissemination of cultural works, and ultimately they're trying to control people's minds. And whether they do that through copyright or tribal assertions, like religious assertions, they're all going after the same thing. And copyright is enshrined in law, and people believe that it's secular the same way they believe genderism is secular. But the irrationality and the depth of these ideologies, they're the same. They're really religious. So
yeah. But you faced this backlash. Was it funny to you back then? Because I can imagine Indians just going batshit crazy about anything that somebody takes out of a mythological text. And we face that. Being in India, we face that if we portray Sita in a way that is not chaste, or you make her look a little sexy, or you make her look a little bruised or upset or something, anything, any portrayal of this goddess, on the one hand, they get so upset that we have portrayed her in a negative light. But at the same time, men do treat women that way too. We are basically portraying how we are being portrayed by men. And somehow that's a problem, but they will not change the way they treat women. It's a kind of a really bizarre paradox how they get so offended and personally make it their mission to take any form of artwork down from the internet because it's their goddess and you can't disrespect a goddess. And
right. Well, it's so political, right? Like controlling other people. That's the nature of politics.
It is.
So it's a purely political thing. And I noticed actually how much the US is becoming like India was. So this was 2008, and the outrage, came from, and I don't, India is so diverse, right? It's even, if anything, it's possibly more diverse than the United States in terms of diversity of thought and opinion. So people would say here, they'd be like, well, how do Indians feel about your work? And I'm just like, my biggest fans are in India, and my, big harshest critics are in India. And it's like a lot of different people are in India. Yeah. But I think we're talking specifically about, I call them Hindutvatis, or is that, or as other friends call it, the Hindutva types.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I initially started getting this criticism, I actually shed tears. I was like, oh, I don't want to offend. No, what I meant to, I have such respect, and I didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about it. I don't want to upset the Hindus. Right. That was before I realized that calling Hindutvatis Hindus is like calling the KKK Christians, right? Like it's a little group that's claiming to speak for all because they're trying to seize political power that way. But I didn't know that at the beginning. And unfortunately, most Americans don't know that. So you can get like a little tiny group of people that Americans aren't familiar with, and Americans will actually believe that they are representatives of everyone. And this is very familiar to me as a Jewish person, because the group that I think has, possibly started these techniques and certainly made the most headway with them is like the Anti-Defamation League, the groups that claim to speak for Jewish people. Totally political, right? And definitely don't speak for me. And this really popped out at me when the Hindutvatis called my Hindu collaborators self-hating Hindus, right? Because that's and I'm like, my people came up with that, right? Self-hating Jews. That's the original like insult lobbied towards people who, you believe that you're entitled to control, who don't do what you want. You call them self-hating.
Yeah. It is bizarre.
What?
I said it is bizarre that they would call them self-hating Hindus, but then I am also not surprised that they would call them. So any
Yeah.
collaborators, as in even the people that have voiced over,
Yeah. I mean,
the
I have
entire,
this, right. And the thing is that like the biggest fans of Sita Sings the Blues are Hindus, right? Because they get all the jokes because they're familiar with, you know, the whole thing with what I'm trying to do. So yeah, it's like Hindus versus Hindus. But I'm so familiar with this. And what I learned as I learned more about the outrage from the Hindutvatis is that in India, being offended actually gives you political control, right? Like in India, you have freedom of speech, except if something's offensive.
yeah, yes,
And
absolutely.
in 2008, when the US was different, I was like, wow, this is a real problem in India, right? Because people are using offendedness. They're inflating victimization in order to seize political control. I'm glad the United States isn't like that.
Nope, spoke too soon.
So as genderism has risen in the United States and identity politics in general, I have seen the US become like India in this way, including, you know, a whole bunch of so-called left-leaning people who are opposed to freedom of speech now, who want the American system to be like the Indian system. They have no idea what, you know, how important freedom of speech is, how important the US First Amendment is. The US is unique in the world in having this First Amendment, and they're prepared to just throw it all away because they can feel the power that they gain just by being offended. And the thing with the Hindutvatis is that's their whole political tactic, right? They have whole websites devoted to being offended. And, you know, if you're offended enough, then that entitles you to control other people's speech. That's terrible.
It is. They've arrested a couple of cartoonists and they have imprisoned stand-up comedians. They have filed FIRs against people who have somehow spoken against the present Modi government. And some of these are women. So you can imagine the kind of threats, sort of added layer of rape added to the kind of threats that women get. So many people have sort of caved in and have apologized profusely, and still the rape threats haven't stopped. People have been doxxed, people have been chased after, you know, so it's like a lot of these minions online, and when they know that something is out there that has apparently offended their whatever, their belief system, they come in such huge crowd, and they all seem to have the same kind of things to say. There is no reasoning. It's just really ugly and very painful to be the person who is at the receiving end of it. So, I mean, if they can arrest people for saying things like the Modi government is being discriminatory towards the farmers, you can imagine, and there is this power towards people that are getting offended more than the people that are actually speaking the truth. So, like you said, it's the people that are offended that are more powerful. Okay, I want
to add to that though. Like in this system, right? You gain power by being offended. This is really unhealthy, right? Because if you are like a legit victim of this and you're like, well, how can I correct this in this system? Then you have to be offended too, right? Like it's a victimization contest, and it's terrible for society. It's like a race to the bottom.
It is, yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we will have to chat about this whole offense business as a separate webinar in itself, because there's just so much to talk about. But I wanna go to the portrayal of the very many amazing goddesses and sculptures and silhouettes that you've used in Cedar. And now, obviously, this is very different from the kind of female that we saw in Sita. Now, could you please explain your motivation behind using these sculptures? And second, if you could talk about what you've mentioned in the synopsis as the other side to this story, that of the goddess, humankind's original deity.
Yeah, so I set myself up to make this movie about Exodus, because Exodus is the center of the Passover story, or at least part of Exodus. And I didn't really like Exodus. I was hoping to. When I started, I thought, well, I didn't like the Ramayana at first either, but I'm sure if I just read it enough and read enough interpretations and really get into it and devote my life to it, I'll get something really profound in the book of Exodus. And I just didn't. There was nothing relatable, and it was super patriarchal. And unlike Sita Sings the Blues, there was no goddess in it. At least I thought there was no goddess in it. Eventually, I realized that what Exodus is about is destroying the goddess. That all of these rules against idol worship and all of these little sub-stories about going and destroying your neighbor's idols, that those idols were in fact goddesses, and that having the single male god requires the elimination of goddess worship, which was really widespread. Even though it was, even though it happened simultaneously with male god worship, and the male gods were ascendant at that time, there was still goddess worship, and that is absolutely forbidden in Abrahamism. I got inspired by this book called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone, even though it's a very imperfect book and has some wacky, dubious content. The basic idea that this is what Exodus is about, I took that to heart. So from that angle, I could see the goddess in the shadows, the goddess being suppressed, the goddess being everything that the Hebrews were told to destroy and eliminate. And once I saw it that way, then I could depict the goddess. And of course, this is the pre-Abrahamic goddesses. And so I looked to pre-Abrahamic art from that region, right? The Mediterranean or the Fertile Crescent region.
Sure.
And I was initially redrawing them, but I didn't really like it. And then I realized that the animation software I was using would work fine if I just took the actual photos of these things. And so that's what I did.
And then you animated them, and they are pretty, what shall we say, bold. Some of these sculptures, there are these women basically pointing to their groin.
Well, that's the Sheila Nagig, which is actually quite anachronistic. I just had to throw her in because, she's so awesome. But yeah. No, the Sheila Nagig is from the Middle Ages in Ireland. But yeah, everyone remembers her. But what's shown in this particular frame is no Sheila Nagigs. And you can see there's all these different depictions of women, right? Like some of them are, really sexy. They have like the big breasts and the narrow waists. And some of them are really pregnant. And some of them are really neutral. And by the way, as far as these little figurines being goddesses, I mean, I think that they are, but I read recently that a lot of these small stone figures were weaving tools, and some of them were bottle stoppers. And like these were, tools and household things, but people chose to make them in the figure of women. But I don't think they were like little idols that were being worshipped. I think they were being used.
Sure. Okay. Okay, I did not know that. I really did think that these were kept in places of some form of a holy, sanctimonious nature somewhere. Maybe not as important as the male sculptures, but I did think that these were somehow figurines that were worshipped at some point.
They may have been, and some of them may have been, and others not, right? But I do know that some of them were bottle stoppers, right? Like there's this famous, really, really early Egyptian terracotta goddess that has her arms in the air, and a really simple abstract thing that was a bottle stopper. Now maybe that bottle was used in religious services, right? Who knows? I mean, and like what's sacred and what's not sacred, maybe there is no distinction, but we don't really know exactly how all these little figures were used. We know that they were buried with people.
Mm. I mean, this is not something that we talked about before, but I'm just curious. I want to just ask you this. But what do you think about portrayal of menstruating women in general? That's not often talked about. It's shown as some form of taboo. You're set aside somewhere, and it's very true for Indian families. I'm sure you're aware. We sort of asked to stay away for 4 or 5 days for
Right.
however long. Yeah.
Right.
We
The
even
no men's sign outside of temples. When I originally saw a no men's sign, I was like, oh, wow, they don't want men's here? Great. But no, they meant no menses.
yeah yeah. Yeah, we are champions of spellings when it comes to words like this. Yes. So, what do you think about menstruation? I think is the most female thing ever, right? Because that's that's biology, that's science, and women menstruate. And as much as we portray women in this way or that way, we give them accentuated breasts or tiny waist and things like that. These portrayals often are limited to the extremities. How one looks on the exterior, like the long hair and the usual stereotypes. But have you wondered about portraying female in ways that are not exterior or that are more biological? Like you mentioned how this woman probably is pretty pregnant. I was just really curious about what do you think about portraying, because it can be seen as gross.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned this because in Seder Masochism, there is an image of the goddess menstruating.
Yes.
It's in the Plague of Blood. And I have a depiction of the Nile, the Nile goddess, and the blood red river is coming out from between her legs.
Yeah.
So I'm down with it. I think it's fascinating. I have this new project that I'm working on called Mystic Symbolic, which I can talk about a little bit later, but it's these symbols that combine in interesting ways. And sometimes the symbol, which is like a stream of water splashing out, attaches itself to another symbol of a woman or a goddess. And I'm like, she's menstruating.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
There's a lot of like abstract goddess imagery where there's a spiral in the belly of the goddess, right? Like the womb, and people talk about life. Well, I also think that that's a good metaphor for like pain, menstrual cramps, something inside. I've never been pregnant, and thank goodness, I really never wanted to be, quite the opposite. But until my hysterectomy 3 years ago, menstruation was a huge part of my life, and like a lot of pain and a lot of iron loss. A lot of, I'd say, problems associated with that. Not all women feel that way about theirs, but yeah, definitely a huge part of being an XX.
Yes, absolutely. And during our initial conversation about us setting this event, we had a brief conversation about how in Indian temples and other sculptures found in different parts of the country, you can actually see women sculptures being portrayed in an actual position where she is in fact having sexual intercourse with a man, or maybe sometimes even a woman, and it's out there in broad daylight for people to see. And yet we go to these temples as a sort of a place of worship, and we think that it's taboo to talk about sex or the female body, and yet we have them beautifully sculpted all over Indian temples. Did you sort of go in that trajectory while you were creating Sita at all?
Absolutely. I freaking love those temples. I love the pre-Mogul Indian art. Oh my gosh. It just blew my mind when I was there. I love it so much.
Right. So it seems to me that there was a time when it was okay to sculpt it and put it out there, because I guess people who did it thought this is what women do. This is how women are. This is one aspect of what she does. She enjoys having sex, and it's okay. And it's in a place of worship. Right now, to think about that is not possible at all. We will never have a new temple with the sculpture of of a woman with probably a voluptuous body, and many of these are actually pretty, what shall we say, pretty bold in the sense some of the female sculptures are shown to give men blowjobs, and there are multiple people. It's sometimes very difficult to make sense of what's going on there. That's how it used to be, like an orgy. And somehow now all those things seem to be taboo, and you're not supposed to talk about it, you're not supposed to cover up and things like that.
But even that is really complicated because they were depicting very hot women, right? Like there are no saggy middle-aged women in these temple images. Whereas if you look at these pre-Abrahamic sculptures, right, you get all different kinds of bodies. They're not all the fertile, never been pregnant ones. The maiden, right? The maiden with the narrow waist. But you do get these maidens with narrow waists on these temple sculptures, old temple sculptures. And then also those temple sculptures were not pre-patriarchal. They were still they were less colonized from the Middle East at that point, but they had their own, agricultural patriarchy already. So I don't want to, like, I still would doubt that this is a female centered expression.
No, I understand.
I still think it's male gaze, right?
Yeah.
But they are beautiful, and I do love them, and they're amazing.
Yes. I think it is obvious based on the type of females that they have portrayed as well. So if it was in fact a saggy middle-aged woman, then you would wonder if it was in fact done for male gaze or whatever. So I agree with you. It's definitely not a time when there was women's liberation or anything like that. That brings me to this question, where there's this one particular scene where you see that there is this bunch of women traveling and sort of getting liberated in the sense by getting rid of the veil that was covering them up into becoming freer in a sense. Now, clearly, I think it's pretty amazing, but clearly you must have had some form of backlash for portraying liberation in this manner. Could you talk about your idea behind this scene, and if at all there was any backlash?
There was no backlash at all. There should have been so much backlash in Cedar Massachusetts. This is a scene from Cedar Massachusetts.
Yeah.
When I was making it, I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble for this. Ooh, people are going to like this." Oh, but pretty much none of that happened, because all of the backlash was because on Facebook, I said that women don't have penises. That was all the backlash. It's so stupid. But yeah, you would think that someone would criticize this, and maybe people have privately. I mean, it does make you go, right? Like,
yeah,
like this is in keeping with a liberal feminist idea of women's liberation. It's like, take your top off. But it's also, like I say, it's complicated. It's like, wouldn't you rather be shirtless?
Oh yeah, totally. I'm anti-clothes.
Yeah. So, you have, this is like they're becoming uncovered, right? Like their shame is being lifted. And when they emerge, they're holding symbols of power, right? Like they're all in positions based on pre-Abrahamic goddesses that I saw. There's the snake, the Minoan snake dancer, and there's the one holding the leaves, and their dress underneath changes a little bit. It reflects what some of these early sculptures are wearing as well. So they are supposed to be goddesses, and they're bare-breasted goddesses.
Yeah, deal with it.
But they're also sexy, right? I mean, it's both of these things. Both.
Yeah. And what's the center point that they're traveling through, this chasm, and they're coming out being liberated. What is that? Um,
That's the goddess, right? And here she's as a tree, but throughout sadomasochism, that goddess in the center is like the most abstract and the one that I have as like the original goddess. Now, I did make her a maiden shape, right? Like her waist is ridiculously narrow and her hips are ridiculously wide.
Yeah.
She's an abstract shape, but as I age and my body stops looking like that, I'm going like, I mean, now I get why there are all these different depictions of pre-Abrahamic women, right? Like I looked sort of like that for for a long time, but now I'm starting to look,
different.
The other stuff, like your waist doesn't go in forever. So I mean that narrow waist depiction, that's youth, right? It's not just female, it's youth.
Sure. So there was no particular issue, like even in casual conversation anywhere, nobody really picked on this particular aspect of that's quite amazing.
But they don't have a chance because far fewer people have seen sadomasochism than have seen Sita Sings the Blues, because sadomasochism's distribution has been suppressed by blacklisting me and it. For unrelated reasons.
Yeah, but now it's available for people to watch, so there should be no reason why people shouldn't watch it. And perhaps
it was available for, because I'm a free culture advocate, so it was available for a while, but the stuff spreads by word of mouth, and when you're blacklisted, the word just doesn't get out.
Yeah. Even if the films that you have made has got nothing to do with the things that they have problem with, they will basically cancel the entire artist itself, which is like the world that we live in right now. And I think you and I share that grief in that it doesn't matter if you made the most funniest, most amazing film in the world, they will not watch it, or even if they do, they will not talk about it. So I get what you're saying. I want to come to this part in the end credits where you've given people a set of reading list or like a reference that people can go back to, and that's basically all the inspiration that you had coming up with the sculptures and all the different female goddess aspect of it in Cedar. Could you tell me, how did you get there? How did you find these books, and what motivated you to choose those books, and how did it affect the depictions of the goddesses in your film?
Well, I read a lot more books than just these, but I would say I chose these from the books that I read, just like this. I mean, they were impactful for me. They were good sources of reference for me. People would ask, what are these symbols in the opening sequence? And it's like, well, read The Great Mother by Erich Neumann, right? Like it talks all about this, all about the snake the Ouroboros and the birth of the male god and the snake and all that, the night. Maria Gimbutas, Language of the Goddess, and some other books. She focuses on prehistoric art, prehistoric depictions of women mostly. She has sort of possibly fanciful interpretations of this prehistoric art, but you know what? Male archaeologists' interpretations are equally fanciful. They're not considered fanciful because there was consensus from all these men. But if the archaeologists had been women, their consensus would have been a lot more like Maria Gimbutas's. And it's a good perspective to have. When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone, I already talked about. Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner. That's a really good book. That's it is what it says on the tin. It's about the creation of patriarchy.
Yep.
Beyond God the Father by Mary Daly. Now she's interesting. Mary Daly was a Catholic and also a radical feminist. And when I learned about her, I was like, how can you be both? And eventually she wasn't. Eventually she was just a radical feminist and not a Catholic anymore. But for a long time, she was still like deeply Catholic in her spirituality. and she reinterpreted Catholic symbols from a feminist perspective, almost like what I was talking about with the book of Exodus, where I started to see the goddess in the shadows, is what she was doing. So Mary Daly's famous for talking about the Trinity, the Catholic Trinity, as being a hijacking of the triple goddess, that they took this and they just made them all men.
Right. Okay. Now, this brings me to this one discussion that we've had before about Da Vinci Code, the film, the book. When you said Trinity, I was just wondering if you'd like to tell us more about why you didn't like it, why you didn't think it was a good interpretation of the female.
Wait, why didn't like the Da Vinci Code?
Yeah.
It was just really badly written. It was just dumb. I mean, that's all I remember from it. I read it on a trip. It was in some hostel book pile. And people were buzzing about it, and I was like, this is stupid. But it's been too long, so I can't remember my actual
Yeah, of course. No, because you mentioned the Trinity and the Catholic author, I kind of sort of went back to our earlier discussion. That's the reason why I asked you. Somebody's asked if Cedar was well received in Jewish film festivals at all.
Well, how can I say this? Jewish film festivals are things that I have only really discovered since making Cedar Masochism.
Right.
So Sita, I don't really think was in Jewish film festivals. There is like Jewish Hindu crossovers. We call them Hinjus, and then the Jewish Buddhist crossover, the Bujus. There is a fascination with many American or Western Jews with non-Abrahamic Eastern traditions. Right. So, and I'm one of them, right? Here I am, a Jew. Now, when Sita came out, people didn't know I was Jewish because I really don't give a shit about Jewish identity and, have issues with identity politics to begin with. So I never mentioned it. And for that reason, I was frequently called a white Christian woman because, being from America, I must be Christian, right?
I mean, the options are just so narrow and so predictable. It's like, it's boring. Come on, get creative with your insults, man.
I thought it was funny that they would be like so outraged by the white Christian woman. Yeah. But anyway, no, it was, I didn't exploit my Jewish heritage until it was time to make Seder Masochism.
Right. So some questions were sent to us by people that have signed up. One very interesting question. I think this is an aspect that's outside of your filmmaking career. There's a question that is, how has your freedom to bicycle anywhere affected your view and portrayal of strong women?
Well, it's certainly increased my portrayal of bicycles. I mean, that's hard to say. I love bicycling, and I'm glad that person knows it.
You did this amazing thing. Remember, you had the map and you sort of charted the path in a way that it's spelled woman.
Woman, that's right. My woman rides. Yeah. So I live in central Illinois in the US, and this is farm country. And a lot of roads are laid out on a grid. Not all of them, but enough of them so that if I'm willing to ride 60 miles, I can spell the word woman in block letters, which I have done. And I guess that's art too, right? It's not related to animation, but it's called GeoWriting. You track your ride and you can spell things. So yeah, I do that. I now try to do that at least once a year. I think I've done 3 or 4 of them now. And I started doing that ride because Strava, the app I use, was a sponsor of the Psychopath. What's his name? That man who identifies as a woman who's sort of fat and he sets all these women's records in cycling.
Oh, yeah. Reese McKinnon.
That's right. Well, see, I'm willing to use. I'll use the male pronouns, but like people change their names. Like, fine, Rachel McKinnon or whatever our name it is. He's still a man. and he doesn't belong in women's cycling. Anyway, I was disgusted that Strava was supporting him as a woman cyclist on the app. So I wrote out the word woman and I titled my ride "Woman Means Adult Human Female." And that was my little protest, and I keep doing it because I like it.
That's pretty amazing.
Hey, are you having men and women's sports in India now too?
Yeah, we've always had.
You've had men and women's sports the whole time?
Yeah, men's separate category and yeah.
No, men in women's sports. Have you had?
No.
So this is the issue in the US. The issue is that we're about to make it legal everywhere or compulsory to have men and women's sports.
We'll get there, Nina. We'll get there very soon.
But cycling, like I've been reading up on differences in men and women's cycling. I'm not an athlete. I'm not a competitor, but I do feel a little bit competitive with some of my local friends. And I noticed that my male friends who are similar to me in age and fitness, they go so much faster than me.
Obviously.
Yeah. Right. And I'm like, how does this happen? Like, how are these men, they're averaging like 18, 19 miles an hour on a ride. And whereas if I'm lucky, maybe 17 and more likely 15 miles an hour. And I'm like, how can they do that? And then I read up on it and it's like, oh, that's why, because across the board, men are like 20, 25% faster than women.
Yep. So far we've got a couple of cases, controversial cases, but that's because of DSD. Nothing to do with actual biological men trying to compete in female sports yet. But I have what shall we say? Dreadful hope for this country. A lot of dreadful hope for this country to catch up with the US and the UK.
Actually, I'm going this total tangent. I met a woman in New York once. She had these trophies, and they were shooting trophies. She had been an Indian shooting champion.
Right.
And I guess shooting is one of the only sports where women can actually, where it makes sense for women to compete with men, and that women frequently win. Like this Indian shooting champion I met.
I wonder how many men it offended.
Not her husband. He seemed proud of her.
Yeah, unless he's competing too.
No, not in that way. All right, sorry.
Yeah. So somebody has asked, because you've taught yourself this art and you've been on your own creating animated films, cartoons, etc. Do you have any advice to people that are starting out wanting to do animation by themselves, not wanting to spend a buckload of money in schools and universities? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, self-teaching. So I've been thinking about that question because that was posed by a friend of mine who's on neatster.org, pitch for neatster.org, and also spinster.xyz. I am successfully self-taught because I have really obsessive traits. And that has been very clear to me this week as I work on this new project called Mystic Symbolic, where I'm actually wanting to learn how to code. And I am 52 years old and have had no interest in learning how to code, except that this particular project it's a visual art coding collaboration.
Right.
And I am so obsessed with it that in order to achieve really specific things, I am willing to code, or at least willing to try to code.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. And so it has been with all of my self-taught art. There's just been something I've wanted to do to the point of obsession. And when I say obsession, I mean, wake up thinking about it, go to sleep thinking about it, think about it on the bike rides. And this impatience, right? And so learning how to do something is the most expedient way to achieve the particular thing. I've been terrible at trying to just learn a skill for the sake of having the skill. There has to be the thing that I want to make. So advice, I wouldn't really take advice from me. But if you have a specific thing that you want to make and are committed to it, to make it, then you just learn the specific things that you need to make the thing, as opposed to trying to learn in a generalist way. That's how I learn.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I learned filmmaking too. Just obsessed with it, like how you said. This last film, I edited it myself, and up until then, I had never edited a film
Wow.
by myself. Yeah, and this project was my obsession that sort of become fruitful in a way. So I totally will take that advice, and I've already implemented that in my filmmaking. What are some of the female characters you were inspired by in the early stages of your career? This is in reference to the Smurfette that you mentioned in the beginning. So where they were like these token Smurfette characters. Back when we did not have a lot to go by. We did not have a lot of references that we could draw from. Where did you go for your inspiration?
Long ago, I saw a book by Linda Barry. This is before, she's a cartoonist. This is before she did Ernie Pook's Comique. She was doing autobiographical comics. And the same bookstore had Love is Hell by Matt Groening. This is before he did The Simpsons. And it turns out that Matt Groening and Linda Barry were friends. And those comics, both of them, were so honest and raw and surprising. They were just unlike anything else I'd seen. And they were really funny. And yeah, so I would say Linda Barry's comics were maybe the first comics by a woman that were just nothing like, different planet from Smurfette, right? So this was like a woman's voice talking about a woman's life. And this is when she was really young too. So it was young and funny and remarkable.
Is this around the time you started making Nina and Eunice?
No, this is Nina's Adventures. This is when I was so I saw these books when I was 19, I think. And I started doing Nina's Adventures in Santa Cruz when I was 20. And then that just became Nina's Adventures. So I was a cartoonist, I did a weekly self-syndicated comic before I did animation. And learned a lot about storytelling and finding my, that was my voice, right? My voice was coming out. And it was when I was that age, like 19, 20, 21, it was like, I had skills. I could draw. But I was like, what am I doing with this? What do I want to say? And I actually see this with a lot of young artists having taught that there's a lot of talent and a lot of skill out there. There's a lot of young people that can draw. But what are you going to use this for? What are you going to say? Do you want to say something? And you can, most young people, they just want a job, right? They just want to work at a studio or something like that. And they don't really want to say something. But if you do, that's going to put you on a wacky path in life. And I almost want to say, I actually have a young relative who's, talented and skilled and also lost somewhat. She doesn't really know what she wants to do. And I want to say to her, I was imagining saying to her, you see all these people that hate me? That's because I'm an artist, right? That's because I tell the truth and I use my art to say things. And that's also the reason there are all these people that love me. Some people love me, some people hate me, but it's because I told the truth with my art, right? I had something to say. So if you really want to be an artist, this is what you're going to get. And I want you to be an artist. I would love it if more young people decided they were going to walk this path, but they need to understand people are going to hate them.
Yeah.
And most people don't want that.
No, they'd rather be liked than be true to themselves and to the world. There's also this mention about you being an artist and how how it worries your father, but in the film it's actually him being the god, and how you're the goat, and you're having this conversation. Was it a willful sort of mixing into the narrative about you being an artist and how it's worrying him and things like that? Any particular reason you included that in the narrative of the film?
That's what he always talked about. The interview I did with my dad was not that long, right? Like the whole thing uncut was maybe 45 minutes. And that's what he chose to talk about. And that's what he always chose to talk about.
Right.
I am the black sheep in my family. I'm the youngest. I'm the only one that never has a steady job, didn't have kids, didn't have a stable marriage. Everyone else is stable and behaving appropriately, and I am not. And my father was always really uneasy with that. And it didn't matter how much money I actually made. What bothered him was I didn't have a steady job. And it's ironic because my father's idea of a steady job was a university position, because when he became a math professor, that was a steady job. And it's a horrible job now, right? Like there's no security in it now, but that would have satisfied him if I had become a university professor. Even if, I had been like really poor and unstable, it would have been this symbol of stability that he would have approved of. So me living this way always was a source of anxiety for him and disapproval.
Of course. There can never be a perfect child. Never, ever.
Yeah, but I have 2 other siblings, so I know some are some are more perfect than others.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Just a couple of last questions, and I think I don't want to take much of your time, but the question is about the Ghibli films. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Yeah. Do you think, what do you think about the women in Ghibli films? And do you think they are realistic in the portrayal, or do you think they are just a man's ideal that has been put on a pedestal?
Well, I haven't seen all the Ghibli films. A lot of them have young girl protagonists, and those are young girl protagonists. They're, innocent and young, and we experience the story through their eyes. I don't really have much to criticize about them. Adult woman characters, I think about Princess Mononoke. No, wait, no, not Princess Mononoke. Sorry. Is it? No, it is Princess Mononoke. There's the woman who has the mining operation, and she employs all these other women to melt metal ore. I think that's in Princess Mononoke.
I wouldn't know, but
and she's neither good nor evil. She she's damaging the environment, but she's giving jobs to women, and she's a mix. So I think that's a good job that they did. Was that Princess Mononoke? Shoot, which they all sort of blend in my head.
Lady Eboshi. Somebody in the comments says Lady Eboshi.
Okay, so am I on the right? Is that the right film? Yeah. Anyway, so she's a mix, right? She's so that's good. A good ambiguous character. In Spirited Away, isn't there like this really old, weird woman who's just weird? I mean, I think that those films have characters that are a nice mix. So yeah, I like them, but I haven't seen that many. And of course, the innocent little girl is always just the innocent little girl. And, she could be an innocent little boy just as well, but he chooses innocent little girls, and that's fine. Right,
of course. So in summary, why don't you tell us about what you're doing now? What's coming from Nina next? Is it a film? Is it some kind of different interesting project that just talked about learning coding and stuff?
It's a different, interesting project. I'm so happy right now. I go through years of just being artistically frustrated and going like, what am I doing? I'm surprised I've done animation as long as I have, because I burned out on comics a long time ago, even though I was obsessed with it when I was younger. And yeah, with mysticsymbolic.art, the website's not up yet, but I have the domain. Mystic Symbolic is a collaboration between me and Atul Varma, who's a coder, and because it's open source software, other people can participate in it as well. There's some other friends of mine maybe working on it. And it's a visionary art generator. I was thinking about making... There's this style of art, right? I just generally call it visionary art. And it uses all these symbols, right? You have eyes where they don't belong, you know, eyes on foreheads and eyes on hands and eyes on the belly and stuff like that. And then, I like making that kind of art. Okay. I like it. But I must admit it's predictable. So one morning I was like, yeah, I'm going to make some art like this. And then I was like, you know, you could get a program to generate this. And that's what we're making. And it's... I blogged about it. If you want to go see some of the work in progress, you can do that. If you go to ninapaley.com, there will be links. But it's going to be much, much better. And I'm just so delighted to have something that is different, that I've never done before, and to have the delight of entering uncharted territory for me, driven entirely by curiosity of like, what will this do? What, you know, what will, and like, I want to see this. I'm going to like do whatever I need to do so that I can see what happens when I, you know, push this button, which is what animation used to feel like 20 years ago when I was still learning it. So I'm really happy that even though I'm, you know, a middle-aged or old lady now at 52, that I can still have this thrill of discovery. So I don't know what y'all are going to think about it, but I'm having a great time. And that's what matters.
From what I've seen on your social media, I think they're pretty awesome too. You know, you're getting some great response, and you know, it's your usual style of posting work in progress and getting feedback from people. So I'm one of those people who watch all your work as you're working on it. Is there any particular time that you're thinking the project will be complete? But I imagine it's like an ongoing project.
Yeah, I don't know when it'll be complete, but I would say in a couple months it might be closer to what I envisioned if I can just get these coders to work on it more. They have day jobs. This is why I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to learn how to code a little bit to get the things that I want. Because it's like, hurry up.
I know. It's frustrating for me to wait on people too. So I understand what you're saying. So you just keep picking up new skills because you'd rather do it yourself quickly and critique yourself harshly and just get on with it. Sometimes it's easier, but I guess in 2 months is not a long time. It'll be
maybe 3 months. There's no colors yet. There's no backgrounds yet. There's no all sorts of things, but this project can just expand like crazy. Like, I don't know when it'll ever be. I mean, it'll be done when we all get bored of it.
Right, of course.
But it's like the way it looks now is not how it's going to look in the future. But I'm still really excited about the way it looks now. It's just the beginning.
Yes, so amazing. And we all wish you great success with the current project. And hopefully in the future, we get to see a lot more of your films as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know how many more I'm going to be making, but I've made quite a few, and as many as I could free online are free online. Go to archive.org. That's the best place to find them. And YouTube stinks. Find my stuff on Vimeo if you can. And if you can't find it on Vimeo, then look for it at archive.org. Or if you can't find it on Archive, look for it on Vimeo. But YouTube is like my least favorite place. Even though I still have stuff there, it's just that should be a place of last resort.
I'm surprised mine is still there as well. So, I mean, as long as it's there, it's good. It's not, then archive.org. I've taken your sage advice very, what shall we say? I've taken it up to a point where I'm starting to think I'll boycott YouTube entirely. Yeah, just not give them content at all anymore. But except this one goes on YouTube. But
The thing is that like YouTube is people look at stuff on YouTube, so they, that is where eyeballs are.
Yeah.
So boycotting it, I don't know, but it's not the first place I want people to look. It's like the last place I want you to look.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So this was great. Nina, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
My butt hurts. I need to stand up.
Classic. So with that, we all thank you for joining us for Women Making Films events, and you have a good rest of the day.
Thanks. It's great to talk to you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Pleasure.
All right.